We've discussed this Expedition Charizard before. There's an entire video dedicated to its own archetype. Head on over and watch that. If you want to know more about VenuChar, this is a powerful card. Its Poke Power can transform any basic energy into fire energy, and its attack can deal 120 damage, which is huge. It's going to OHKO anything in E-card. But I even mentioned in that video that most of the time this is going to be overkill. It's going to be major overkill, and that's a whole lot of setup for a lot of damage that doesn't really matter. So today we're going to focus on the other Expedition Charizard, the one that I prefer. As you can see, it's a lot simpler to set up, and there's not a whole lot of chance of overkill here. You're going to hit that magic number for E-card, which is 60 damage for 3 energy. If you're familiar with E-card, if you've been playing along with these videos as they upload, you know that 60 damage for 3 energy is good in E-card. You know how magical that number is and why. Not as impressive as Ugly Charizard's 120 damage, but definitely more consistent, easier to set up, arguably more fun to play and play against, and cheaper if you are just dead set on running some kind of E-card Charizard. This one's a better choice. But clearly the deck can't be just Charizard. What else pairs with it? Well, pretty simple answer. It's kind of the same Pokemon that I slap onto every single Rogue deck because it's that good. Electabuzz. This is the Pokemon you want to start the game with. Energy Draw not only accelerates an energy by getting a second energy into play on your first turn attacking because it only costs 1 colorless energy, it's also thinning your deck by 1 card, making it easier to search out and draw other cards that you want to play. And then Reflect Energy is going to deal 20 damage and move one of those energy onto your bench Pokemon. It's the setup Pokemon. Energy Draw is going to let you grab fire energy out of your deck, and then next turn, Reflect Energy those fires onto a bench Charmander, Charmeleon, Charizard, whatever you got there. You're going to be able to power up a Flamethrower a turn early while also dealing 20 damage, setting up the opposing Pokemon for an easier Flamethrower knockout. On top of that, Electabuzz is going to be able to cover Charizard's weakness. This is just my personal opinion, but I think when you compare decks side by side, Electabuzz just smokes Venusaur. So we know 2 of the cards that are in this deck. What's the rest of the deck list? Excellent question. Let's look at it right now. Wouldn't you know it, there's some Charmanders in this deck. Expedition has 2 Charmanders to choose from. I go with this one just because I personally like it better. Hopefully your Charmanders aren't seeing a whole lot of action, but statistically you are going to have to start some games with them, so I do like having a 1 energy attack on that basic. With E-card, you don't really have to worry about a 50 HP basic sitting in the active position too long. You're going to be able to evolve up pretty quick considering all of the search tools available. It's going to be pretty rare too that you have to go full aggro with a Charmeleon on turn 2, but you definitely have that option if you want to. You can evolve on up, use Double Scratch, it's only a 2 energy attack. And Flamethrower's not bad either. It's only 10 damage less than the Flamethrower you're going to see on the Charizard, but hopefully by the time you have 3 energy attached to a Charmeleon, you're going to be able to go ahead and evolve into Charizard anyway. Unless you end up in a scenario where all of your Charizards are prized and you end up with a Charmeleon-based deck. But as I said in the intro, hopefully you're starting out with an Electabuzz, which is going to accelerate a little bit of energy. It's going to make those Flamethrowers a little easier to use because you don't have to worry about discarding that energy and then finding another one super quick next turn to replace it with. You're already going to have a ton of energy spread around. Further basic energy support is going to come from a 2/2 Clefable line. Its power lets you trade a card in your hand for a basic energy card in your deck. This is primarily going to be used to grab a lightning energy in order to attach to an Electabuzz on turn 2 if you don't have one already. That way it can use Reflect Energy as early as possible. And yeah, if you don't have the Clefairy in hand at the beginning of the game, then Electabuzz can grab a lightning energy itself with Energy Draw, but the idea is to grab those fire energies directly out of the deck, attach to Electabuzz, and then reflect them over to your Charmanders and Charmeleons on the bench. This deck can function with or without the Clefables, but I found that they're just good to be in there for consistency and so that you're not giving your opponent so many mulligans. Gathering the Pokemon you need is pretty easy due to some classic staples that you're going to see here. It's going to look pretty familiar. A full playset of Pokemon Fan Club and a full playset of Professor Elm's training method. That way, no matter what it is that you need need to hit the field, you're going to be able to find it, be it basic or evolution card. The usual draw support as well, we're going to be looking at 3 copies of Professor Oak's Research, 3 copies of Underground Expedition, and 3 copies of Copycat. If you opt to run a version of this deck that doesn't include Clefable, if you're sticking strictly to Electabuzz, Charizard, or maybe even just Charizard, then I would advise substituting out some of these draw cards for Desert Shaman, just so you can control your opponent's hand back down to a manageable size, because you're going to be giving them a lot of extra cards off of mulligans. Copycat can also give you some advantage there. If your opponent's got 12 cards in their hand, you can have 12 cards in your hand too. But when you're playing a rogue deck, the idea is always to outpace your opponent, so you don't want them to have all of their resources in hand at the same time. Because Flamethrower is going to be discarding a lot of energy cards, I got 2 copies of Talon Volunteers in here. You can also get back some key Pokemon with your Volunteers, which is always nice for those scenarios where you end up with 2 Charmanders in the prize cards or something like that. Once you have a Charizard fully powered on the bench, you want to be able to just get that Electabuzz out of the active position. Sometimes it will make sense to just reflect energy over and over and over again until the Electabuzz gets knocked out and just power up multiple Charizards on the bench, but usually you want to start hitting for 60 damage as quickly as possible, and Switch is going to allow you to do that. Electabuzz can retreat for 2. I mean, it's pretty simple to get 2 energy onto Electabuzz, but you want to have it as a backup just in case your opponent drops some type of water Pokemon counter. So Switch is going to allow you to safely get that Electabuzz onto the bench with its energy cards attached and move the Charizard into the active position. The same thing for if you have a Charizard that's close to being knocked out, feel a little unsafe keeping it in the active, and you have another fully powered Charizard on the bench, using Switch to just move the 2 is a lot better than having to retreat a 2 energy retreater. A couple copies of Full Heal in here just for those tricky special condition decks like your Vileplumes and your Beedrills, which will already be sweating a little bit against a fire deck that's this fast. 4 lightning energy in here for the Electabuzz just so it can use reflect energy, and then the rest of the deck is going to be filled out with basic fire. There are some useful special energies that this deck can utilize. I tried running it with Cyclone and Warp. They were useful, but I just really liked having an all basic energy deck. That way there was more fluidity between Electabuzz, Clefable, and Charizard. Like most E-card rogues, the gameplay is very straightforward. The setup is simple, and getting to your first attack is very streamlined. But I know the comparisons are still going to get made, so let's go ahead and talk about a couple. The outcome of a fully set up VenuChar build is more impressive. I'm not arguing that. VenuChar is a very good deck in its own right. One of the problems I have in running it though is that you are looking at getting this set up at a minimum on turn 3 with a minimum of getting 6 Pokemon into play. During those first 3 turns, you're going to be doing very little damage, if any. With Electabuzz, you're at least doing 20 damage per turn, starting on turn 2, while also accelerating energy onto the bench. And again, I get it. VenuChar can be fully set up on turn 3 and deal 120 damage on turn 3, as opposed to the build we just talked about, the Rogue Charizard, where you're dealing 60 damage on turn 3. That's half the damage. Why would I ever argue that that's better? Well, that's because the Rogue Charizard requires a lot less setup. It's streamlined. You don't have to go digging through your deck. Honestly, if you took out that Clefable line, you could probably run Ball Engine with this Charizard, and setup would be even faster. If you've played that VenuChar build, you know that it is pretty rare to get fully set up on turn 3. You usually have to take another turn or so to use another supporter card to find the evolutions that you need to fully get that Venusaur and a Charizard, bare minimum, into play. I don't think that Flamethrower Charizard is strictly better than Scorching Whirlwind. I just think it's easier to set up and more efficient in its attacks. The other big comparison is Ninetales. It's like we're in base set again. Ethereal Flame is going to deal 90 damage for 3 energy, which is better than what Charizard's dealing, and Ninetales is a stage 1, Charizard is a stage 2, so it's technically faster, but not really, because Ethereal Flame requires 3 energy. So you're going to be using it for the first time on turn 3, same as Charizard. Typhlosion does offer energy acceleration, but Heat Up really only kicks in after you've used Ethereal Flame once. unless you're purposefully lagging behind in energy just so you can use Heat Up, but even then you're still stalling yourself out for a turn. Even then, Ninetales is going to be just short of knocking out a Charizard, so the Ninetales Charizard direct matchup, they're both going to be 2-hit KOs against each other. And again, I'm not saying that Flamethrower Charizard is better than Ethereal Flame Ninetales. I don't think that's true. It's just that in order to get Ninetales set up, it requires a lot more setup. And then Ninetales is reliant on Typhlosion in order to efficiently and consistently use Ethereal Flame a second or third time. One final note I want to make about this deck is that it is not worth it to make it in physical form. The non-holo going rate for one of these Charizards is $75. That is the market price. Even if you're buying a damaged copy, you're still going to have to pay anywhere from like 23 to 25 bucks. The Charizard tax is way too high on these early prints. Luckily, I already had a copy from years and years ago, and I just printed 3 proxies for the purpose of this video. You really shouldn't have to pay $75 for any Charizard. It's stupid. But I do want to continue the discussion down in the comments on what E-card fire deck is the best. Which cards do you prefer using? Do you think that the Flamethrower Charizard should even rank up there with a Ninetales or Whirlwind Charizard? Thank you so much for watching till the end of the video. If you want to help out the channel a little bit too, make sure you do leave a comment and a like. Social media links are down in the description, and I will see you next video.